Hello, welcome to Deeper Than Dogma, our little weekly discussion panel about discussions relating to the great debate community here on YouTube. Tonight we are going to be talking about religion and is it a mental illness? Now, this is a topic that has come up recently again in the community, and it's a topic that seems to reappearing in the community. And so tonight we want to kind of dive into this and take a look at it. This entire religion is a mental illness argument, and see is there any truth in it? How effective of an argument is it actually? And why does it seem to keep on reappearing as an argument, even though it seems to be shot down every couple months? So I think just to start off with it is the idea is that is there any truth in it? Where do we keep on getting this idea? Why do we keep on relating religion as a mental illness? Does anybody want to go with that?
Well, I think just in society in general, when someone disagrees with someone else strongly, they always say, "Oh, you're crazy," or you're delusional, and I think it just gets carried a little too far from there. Um, I think only a trained medical professional can decide who's mentally ill or not. But when someone has false belief, the word delusion comes up at that point, and that's once you say delusion or delusional, then mental illness is not too far away from there. So I think that's where it kind of stems from. Um, but you know, like I said, I think we have to leave it up to the medical professionals to decide. But can we say like all the people who drank the Kool-Aid in the Jim Jones cult? Can we say all those people were mentally ill? My guess is no, they're not. But something drove them. I remember I saw a documentary in the '70s about some cult where like straight-laced accountants were leaving their jobs to join this cult, and they had kind of like a sense of freedom and join the cult. I guess they got so sick of the day-to-day routine that to join some sort of cult was so refreshing to them, to leave their 9-to-5 cushy jobs.
Mm.
But
I'm not real clear on still why people are calling it a mental illness. Like, why does that pop up, or what are the claims being made? Does anybody know?
Well, I mean that's the good question. Is like you said in yourself there when you're talking to Floyd, is that it should be up to the medical professionals to diagnose something as a mental illness or not. Why hasn't it been? What criteria are people looking for in whether or not something is a mental illness in order for them to even claim it is in the first place?
Yeah, that's I'm not sure what criteria they're using.
yeah,
The mental field or the medical field does have a few set criteria, and it doesn't mean any of them, maybe close to one of them. But I'm not sure what criteria they're using.
The people who advocate, who are in the community, who are trying to recommend that we characterize the religious or religiosity as a mental disorder, are doing so for a couple of reasons, as I see it. The first thing is that they're seeing people who have not just false beliefs. Everyone's got false beliefs, right? Everyone can be mistaken about something, but they have beliefs that are radically false, drastically false. They're really irrational as they see them, right? I mean, I'm an atheist. I think that religious beliefs are, in the main, quite irrational, and fundamentalist beliefs I think are really very, very uncoupled from reality, and they're not just making sort of extravagant metaphysical claims about things that are untestable. A lot of the times they're making empirical claims about things that we can demonstrate are false. And when you demonstrate the falsity, they reject the evidence, right? And that just seems perverse, right? That just seems like, wow, something's really messed up, right? And so they see that there are people who have false beliefs. That is, they're operating under a delusion, literally believing a falsehood. They believe that the beliefs are arrived at completely incorrectly, not by any rational process, that the belief is unwarranted and unjustified, so it's unreasonable and irrational, and they defend their beliefs, usually by things like appeal to faith or some very, very specious reasoning. And even when they're confronted with good objections and counter arguments, not that they're always encountering those, but when they do encounter those, they tend to disregard them and dismiss them. And this just seems perverse. And so I think people get exasperated and frustrated when they encounter people who this way, and they think, there must be something wrong with their minds or their brains. There's either something wrong with their thought process at a psychological level, or one level lower, sort of at the physical level, there's something wrong with the hardware, something going on with their brains. So I think that's sort of that's what they're observing that occasions this idea that the religious are mentally ill. But there's a couple of problems with that. The first thing that it overlooks is that there's all kinds of irrationality out there. There are people who believe in conspiracy theories. They're not religious, right? There are people who have, pernicious and stupid political ideologies, and people on different sides of a political question or opposite ends of the political spectrum will view the other side as completely divorced from reality. They're just not seeing the facts. They're not appreciating what's there to be seen. They're using bad arguments, right? So, irrationality is all over the place. It's not like irrationality is just the province of the religious, right? If we're going to start calling people insane or mentally ill or mentally disordered on the basis that they have false beliefs, irrational beliefs, beliefs that are resistant in the face of good objections and good counter evidence, and arrived at by specious reasoning, well, we're going to have to categorize huge swaths of our culture as being mentally ill. It's not just the religious. It's not going to stop there. There's no way to arbitrarily say, it ends at religion.
If I believe in ghosts or whatever or anything.
Yeah, people who believe in woo, people who believe in some weird political philosophy, people who believe in conspiracy theories. It's just going to go on and on. But the big thing that I think is wrong with this is that when we talk about mental illness, it doesn't matter what your diagnostic criteria are. It doesn't matter if you're using the DSM-4 or some other diagnostic criteria. What you're saying when you're saying that someone is mentally ill is you're saying that their mind or the brain, or at least their mind anyway, is disordered. That it's not that it's not functioning optimally and living up to our best epistemic norms and standards of good reasoning, but that it's somehow malfunctioning, that their mind is malfunctioning. Not that they're using their mind incorrectly, that they're making a mistake, that they're just shit reasoners. No. It's the allegation that they can't reason well, right? They can't. There's something wrong with their minds. It's malfunctioning, right, relative to some established norm. And so you're accusing a person of having a malfunctioning mind, not merely misusing their mind, not accusing them of having a poorly trained mind, or be the unfortunate victim of brainwashing and never having had your critical faculties well developed and trained. You're accusing them of being incapable of reasoning properly. And yet, I think these same people have a tendency to not just allege that there's something wrong with their minds, but to judge these people and condemn them morally for not using their minds. Well, look, if they're really mentally ill, you shouldn't be condemning them this way. There's nothing they could do about it.
Quite.
But if there's something you can do about it, if you can actually reason a person out of their religiosity, and that happens every day. Every day, people reason themselves out and have other people help them reason their way out of them, sort of improve their epistemological standards. That, I think, falsifies the claim that religiosity and religious beliefs is a mental illness. I think it's just, I think it's false on its face. That's my view.
Yeah,
Dave, you put something in the sidebar here earlier, saying according to the DSM-5, there actually is a section on diagnosing religious and spiritual problems. Do you want to expand on that maybe a little bit?
I guess first of all I should probably mention I'm not the biggest fan of the DSM. I'm just going to put it out there. I think it's woefully inadequate for what it's trying to do. That being said, in the DSM-5, which is the most recent version, I know, I don't know if Gary's watching, but Gary would have wanted me to say that as well. I'm acting like he's dead. He's off YouTube for like 2 weeks. But anyway, So yeah, the DSM-5 does have religious and spiritual issues. I haven't got a copy of the DSM-5 because it's like so much money that you wouldn't even believe for what it is, but I'm not going to turn this into a rant. It's basically, I'm just going to quickly read this. Given the important role that spirituality and religion play in many people's life in the experience of coping with health and illness, it seems odd that such important elements are in the margins of powerful and commanding something of DSM, so there. Explanations for understanding it in glaring absence are complex and impacted by some powerful political and sociological forces. Basically, the reason why it wasn't diagnosable in the past was kind of because there was a fundamental neglect in psychology, at least for a empirically based model of what it means to be studying something psychologically from a religious point of view. We had people like I say we, as in psychology research, had likes of William James and Carl Jung who mentioned like the psychology of religion, but kind of philosophically, oh, this is why religion is the way it is. For example, for Freud, it was basically God was a father figure, that sort of this meta-narrative that kind of limp-wristed, oh, this is why religion is the way it is, but it wasn't really empirically driven until probably the 80s and 90s, and I guess with the new atheism sort of coming a few decades after that, it put religion on a level playing field, in that that's probably the greatest success of new atheism, is that nothing is sacred anymore, that nothing is beyond sort of criticism. And so that's how we got into where we have now, the psychology of religion. So yeah, I think that's why the DSM-5 has it and the DSM-4. I can't remember having anything like that. And it was one of the many changes between the DSM-4 and 5. But essentially, it's because I think people have religion for there's a reason why religion survives, in the same way there's a reason why being politically minded survives. There's a reason why democracy has survived, and so on. So I think it's one of those things that we need to acknowledge exists. And I think stigmatizing religion as a mental illness, because that's all it is, it's a poisoning of the well. I think that's clear to most people watching, that it's not really an argument, it's just trying to say, oh, we don't have to deal with them, they're just mentally ill. It's almost palming them off and saying, I don't have to deal with you because you're just this, like as we were saying, there's something wrong with you that you can't overcome, which I fundamentally disagree with. I don't think there is such a thing as an unreasonable person. And I'm going to stop there because I know Ozzy wants to talk about the DSM.
Sure. One second, just off track for one quick second. I know you wanted to do a public service announcement real quick, and then we'll throw it back to Ozzy.
On topic of Gary, if Gary is watching, or if he's not, either way, I want to go on record and say, if you are taking an extended break, I hope you have a great time, because I think you deserve it. After putting up with all us guys for what seems like forever, you deserve a break, but hopefully you're back soon and refreshed and as good as ever. And that's hopefully echoed by everyone in here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Gary, if you're listening, if you're going on hiatus for a couple of weeks, that's great. But we do hope you'll come back. You're one of the most valuable contributors in the Great Debate, as I see it. Whatever side of the issue you're on, your content is first rate. I recommend it to everyone all the time. So I hope if you're on hiatus, it won't be for long.
All right, you said you wanted to make a remark about the DSM there.
Just for the sake of people who don't know what the DSM is, what we're talking about with these initials, DSM, it stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. It is the Bible that psychiatrists use, and also clinical psychologists use, to diagnose clinical cases of everything from schizophrenia to depression, to every kind of mental disorder, really, from very, very serious ones to minor ones, just sort of problems in living. So it's just this big fat book that divides mental disorders of all sorts into categories and subcategories. It's used for billing purposes by the insurance companies out there. But people who work in clinical psychology and psychiatry use it because it lists criteria. If a patient comes to you or a client comes to you and they exhibit this symptom, this symptom, this symptom, this symptom, if they exhibit 7 out of these 11 things, then they can be diagnosed as such and such. And that's what the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And it's published by the American Psychiatric Association, and it's gone through many, many editions, and it has a peculiar history because the DSM is not, it's not like we have litmus tests for insanity. It's not like, you can just sort of extract some cerebrospinal fluid out of somebody, put it in a test tube, put litmus paper in there and say, oh, if it turns red, he's insane, and if it turns blue, he's okay. If it's red, he's got schizophrenia. If it's some other color, it's something else. It doesn't work that way. We diagnose mental disorders in large part based on the fact that people are unhappy. People have people have mental and behavioral conditions that cause problems for them, and what causes a problem for you is largely dependent on what goes on in your culture and what your culture says is socially acceptable. So, homosexuality, for instance, back in the day when homosexuality was seen as a great evil and a great mental aberration, was seen as a psychiatric disorder. You could be treated for homosexuality. You could be diagnosed with homosexuality, and dysmenorrhea. I remember in a very early version of the DSM, basically PMS was a kind of mental disorder, a lower grade one. So the DSM, it's not just pure science. It's a sociological work. It's a work that reflects the social mores and attitudes. And I don't think that we can use it as some hard piece of science to absolutely decide what should be considered sane and insane. And the people who want to argue that the religious are insane would say, listen, the reason that the religious are not considered insane is because religion is valorized in our culture. It just gets it gets a pass, and consequently, what is manifestly irrational and delusional behavior and should be seen as madness is not being seen as madness. And that's because of the way the DSM works. The DSM is a cultural work. It's a cultural product. It's not just a pure scientific work. And I think that part of the argument is actually right. But what I think is wrong is that there's any reason to think that people who are religious and are irrational to the degree that they are when they are being irrational, because there's something wrong with their minds. I think that there are perfectly mundane explanations for why people are irrational when they suffer from religious irrationalities, and it's not because there's anything wrong with their minds. They're just reasoning suboptimally, but they're mundane reasons. I made a video about this where I discussed some of those things.
Cider, you wanted to add something else to the DSM-5 as well, right? Or DSM in general?
It wasn't so much. No, it wasn't about the DSM, but it was about Dave's last remark that that people espousing the argument of religion being a mental illness will then use it so that they can dismiss the religious. But with respect, I disagree. I don't think that's what's happening. You have this very strange phenomenon, which Ozzy kind of alluded to earlier, where they will, on the one hand, accuse these people of being mentally ill, and then beat them over the head with, and give them all kinds of stick for being mentally ill in the first place. So they're kind of wanting to have it both ways, and I think that's why so many people tend to object to the argument when it's put that way.
Yeah, I agree. Shanna, you wanted to add something as well.
Yeah, it's kind of on what Oz was saying about the DSM-5. It's important to remember, like what he was saying, that it's not, like hard science, and this is just it. I think it was from 52 to December 9th of 73, homosexuality was in the DSM as a psychological illness. So calm down with that shit.
Yeah, it's not a bunch of check boxes. It's not, you meet this, check, check, check. There you go.
Well, I mean, they look at it. They look at what's in. I mean, psychiatrists and psychologists need the DSM-5 to code, right? Insurance companies won't pay unless they're using a code from the DSM. So, I mean, they need this, okay? And they use it. It's a good tool. It's a good guideline tool, not Bible. But I mean, they also go by, if a behavior is dysfunctional, if it's distressing, if it's what's the other one, deviant from societal norms. There's a lot of other things at play here. You can't just haphazardly throw around mental illness on people. It just doesn't work that way. This is welcome to reality.
I tried to say that the other day. If people would, if they're going to use it in a colloquial sense, like "Hey, you're crazy" kind of thing, it needs to be clear that that's how they're using it, or using it some other way.
Yeah,
I mean,
oh,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, that's exactly why my position is that I really don't care what someone is going to use as a label to attach to what I believe or what my position is, because the position attaching a label such as mentally ill doesn't actually accomplish anything. I can call anyone mentally ill for having something that deviates from what I think they should. But not only do societal perceptions of what should be the correct beliefs change, but individuals change their own beliefs over time as well. And it's basically like saying that, you know, I can call you this name, and if I call you this name, then you should feel really bad about what you believe. But it doesn't undermine any of the things that lead you to believe that. And if the person who's making the argument, okay, religion is a mental illness, first of all, therefore what? And then second of all, what if atheism was in the DSM? What if atheism, because of this societal belief, what if atheism was in this DSM as a mental disorder, saying you have a deficiency in some way since you're an atheist? Then what would that mean? Would you therefore say, okay, maybe I'll just renounce my atheism and go and accept religion simply because this is a group of experts in the field of psychology, of course, but just because there's a group of people saying that you're mentally ill for what you believe, it doesn't undermine anything, any of your arguments, doesn't understand any of your lines of reasoning. It bypasses all of that and just says, I'm going to slap a label on this as a derogatory term, and I'm going to use this as an insult to shame you, basically.
Yeah.
You bring up a good point. I remember when this kind of first came up, there was a couple things that I was looking into as well. And one of the things that I found was an article published that was talking about high-functioning autistic people and some people with Asperger's, people that had a hard time in social interaction, in any type of social event, I guess. They were found more likely to hold atheistic beliefs, going against the norm, not really having, not just not integrating well with other people in society. Now, from that, I mean, if you wanted to really simplify the argument, you could even come by there and show that there's a link between, high functioning autism and atheism, by the argument that some people use here. But nobody would actually buy into that. That wouldn't be an effective argument. But anyway, absolute atheism. You wanted to go after Aaron here, so
yes, I did. Yeah.
Oh no, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to agree with something Ozzy said in the side chat about labeling mental illness on religious people is an ad hominem. I mean, basically, you're telling me your opinions don't matter because I say that you're mentally ill. I think we should leave the diagnosis or the labels to the professionals, and make sure that if someone's going to say something like that, that it is that they're very clear that, like, this is just my opinion that you're delusional. I'm not saying you are, but it's my opinion that you are, because we don't want to open those doors to these kind of ad hominems and then make ourselves look like bullies, just something that really all I wanted to point in right there.
May I interject a small point on that?
Sure.
What absolute atheism is saying is right. I go even further, though. Even if a person is mentally ill, even if a person's religious beliefs is the product of a mental disorder, you can't refute the content of what they believe by pointing out to something wrong with their mind or brain. Right? It could still be true, right? You could have a raving lunatic can be right, okay? Even if he gets there by wrong reasoning, you still have to point out that there's something wrong. You still have to do the work. So your work is still all left ahead of you. So it is in fact ad hominem. You are literally committing the ad hominem fallacy when you say, I don't have to pay attention to your view because there's something wrong with you, specifically your mind. Right?
That's good.
It's literally ad hominem. The other thing is that it's the genetic fallacy. You're saying the belief issues forth from this source, from this kind of source, a source that I impugn. Ergo, it's no good. No, you have to show that you have to show that it's irrational. You can't show that it's a product of someone's brain. Every thought is a product of somebody's brain. Yeah. So if you want to say that it's a product of a malfunctioning brain, you have to show that the thought process was erroneous and fallacious. What do we call that? We call that generating an argument and showing that the argument is fallacious, that the other person is putting forth. And so it doesn't matter if the person is in fact stark raving mad. Okay, if you want to refute what a schizophrenic says, you can't say, "Oh, you're a schizophrenic." That's no good. That's the genetic fallacy, and it's the ad hominem fallacy. We don't look like we live in the kingdom of reason when we object to religiosity and religious claims using this kind of objection.
Especially in situations where you get people that recognize themselves as very strong atheists, people that are anti-theist, where they want to see less religion in the world, and they want to try to get rid of religion or discourage people from religion using critical thinking and rational thought or whatever one to say is that. But if you go out and just call religion a mental illness, it's dismissing it too easily. You're missing your own point at this point in time, because no longer are you asking any of the real questions about what would drive somebody to religion. You're just dismissing it out of hand without actually fully understanding a position that you might oppose.
Mm-hmm.
But Floyd, you wanted to add some stuff in here as well, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can go the other way around. I've been in the great debate community in one way or another for quite some time, and over the years I've been called mentally ill because I'm an atheist. You could say all atheists lack sensus divinitatis. Therefore, we're handicapped. We're lacking something that theists have. So therefore, in some sense, we could be mentally ill, or just like some people could be born without eyes, we're born without the sense of the divine. So therefore, we're mentally ill. Or you can even theorize that atheists are evolving separately than theists. It's the way people evolved into blonde hair from black hair.
Right. I have a spiritual deficiency.
Right, exactly. Although I guess one could argue, is there some sort of divine pill that could be made, and if not, why can't God inject us with it himself?
Well, even looking on that, if you were to find out, you could find an injection that you could give a religious person and they would stop being religious. At that point, are you not taking away some of their thoughts, blocking the way they're thinking? You're actually screwing with the brain that was functioning normally.
Yeah. I mean, in people who are psychotic, antipsychotic drugs do make them overcome their illusions, the voices they hear in their heads, the paranoid delusions they have. So it's definitely chemical, for them. So if you can just take a certain drug to change your mind on things, it does kind of make you wonder. Well, if someone injects me with a certain drug, will I change my mind about atheism or theism?
I mean, is that even possible? Like, I don't know. Now, the one of the things that came up that in a recent video was somebody had quoted Sam Harris as is also stating that that he views the religious as a mental illness. I can't remember what the exact quote is, but I think it's here. that it's merely an accident of history that is considered normal in our society to believe that the creator of the universe can hear your thoughts, while it is demonstrative of a mental illness to believe that he's communicating with you by having rain tap and Morse code on your bedroom window. Now, Sam Harris has made other quotes like this that has kind of made it seem like he almost believes that religion is also a mental illness. But I've read through these quotes before, and I know that he likens it to mental illness in a couple of cases. But does anyone actually think that Sam Harris himself is actually saying that religion is a mental illness?
Well, I've read Sam Harris's work very carefully. I've read everything he's written. I've read every blog post he's written. I know his work very, very well. And Sam Harris does not think that religiosity and religious belief is mental illness. What he says is, and it's what I've said in my own videos a number of times, many people have heard me say this, and I didn't come up with this idea. I'm actually just echoing Sam Harris's position on this, that bad ideas and bad beliefs and a bad epistemology can result in you believing things which can result in millions of people, billions of people in the world coming to believe things which you would otherwise have to be insane to believe. So it's his view that you don't have to be insane at all to have beliefs that sound like you're insane, that make you look and sound and act like you're insane. Right? All you have to do is believe enough false things, and you are going to look indistinguishable from someone whose brain is malfunctioning. Why? Because if you are reasoning irrationally because you don't know how to reason well, and you've got on board a bunch of false beliefs, and you've got on board a whole bunch of beliefs that say I need to compartmentalize and privilege these beliefs and insulate them against any kinds of objection, you are effectively nullifying any objection and counter arguments that could come your way. You're interfering with your own ability to revise and update and reject things that are in your belief set. And so you're going to look for all the world like you're insane. But Sam Harris does not believe that that mental illness is what explains religiosity, or that religiosity is a species of mental illness. He thinks that this is, deranged thinking. It is irrational. It's manifestly irrational. But he doesn't think that it's mental illness. But he does think that if you have enough bad and specious beliefs and terrible reasoning practices, you are going to end up believing and communicating and culturally transmitting to your children and other people around you beliefs which a person would have to otherwise be insane to believe. Right? The kind of thing that you would have to be insane to believe all on your own, you don't have to be insane to transmit to other people. Right? I mean, how do these beliefs get propagated? Right? There's no one going around tampering with anybody's brains. Right? All you have to do is take kids and throw them into Jesus camp, and you're going to get a generation of fundamentalists growing out of those kids. It's not like, we just take these kids and suddenly they're mentally ill because we put them in Jesus camp. No. Nothing happened to their brains there that wouldn't have happened if they hadn't gone to a madrasa, or if they had gone to a political indoctrination camp or conspiracy school or whatever. All you need are bad ideas. And that's Sam Harris's position on this. And I've read practically, I think I've read everything he's written, except his latest book on spirituality. I think it's called Waking Up. I started reading it. I put it down. I haven't finished it yet. But for that, I think I've read everything he's written on the subject of religion and just about everything. And that's not his view. That's a mischaracterization of his view. The people who are saying that.
I just want to say that I went to a very good conspiracy school. But but you bring up the point that the people might have bad epistemology, that they might have these they're just misled in a certain way, but it's deep set. How do you reason with somebody that's starting off from a point where with so many facts that you might think are wrong or misleading? Dave, I think you wanted to contribute to this.
I guess touching on the broader picture of, reasoning with someone who's unreasonable, I personally don't think there is such a thing as an unreasonable person. I think it's just that we're trying to fight fire trying to put a fire out with petrol, that we're almost igniting their beliefs by confrontation. So, for example, I remember Alex Barton had a discussion with someone who I can't remember, but basically Alex was contesting him, and he said, well, the Bible says that, doubters will ridicule me, so therefore that offers more justification for my belief. So the fact that people are saying I'm wrong actually proves I'm right. And that's a very good way to avoid cognitive dissonance, if anyone's not noticed that. The fact that you're telling me I'm wrong is actually proving me that I'm right. So, but I think the fundamental issue is I don't think there is such a thing as an unreasonable person. It's just, for example, when I did my the poll recently of saying who's the most unreasonable person on YouTube, and I think it was Saitembu and KNG-Man who were very close to the top. But I think you can get through to these people. There's just a knack to it. You've got to speak their language. You can't cognitively reason someone out of a position they didn't cognitively reason themselves into. For example, and if it's an emotional issue or if it's a pragmatic issue. For example, William Lane Craig isn't going to stop being a Christian if he stops believing in God, because his entire career and his job depends on him being a Christian. So when you have pragmatics into it, you have a social obligation, you have financial obligation, you have that good old ego protection mechanism and things like that. So the trouble is when we're trying to say, oh well, person X, this is why your argument doesn't work, or and even just taking away their justification doesn't necessarily lead to a removal of a belief. So just because you could shoot down every single argument for theism, for example, the Kalam cosmological argument and the modal ontological and so on, and people will still say, well, I still believe in God. And taking away the justification isn't enough to take away belief. And that's the scary thing, I think, in my view.
Cider?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, as my memory takes me, because I might forget what I'm talking about, which is perfectly plausible. To Dave's point, just to further on that, I've thought for quite a while now that one of the reasons that you could shoot down all the arguments for theism and a theist will still might well say, well, I still believe. As I think that we often miss that religion is tied up in people's identity, and so if you threaten if you shoot down somebody's theism, you threaten a part of their identity, and that can be very frightening for people, because then they lose a sense of who they are to a degree. And I think that can be very frightening for people, and that's why often people will fight so hard against it in all the evidence. So that's what I would add to that. Just on the whole thing about Sam Harris, I mean, even if Sam Harris had said that he believes religion is a mental illness, that's a bad argument for adding any weight to that claim. I'm sure everyone in here has things that we disagree with various atheist authorities on. Dawkins, Hitchens, Harris, whoever else. There are things that we disagree with these authority figures on, and that doesn't make any difference as to how right they are or not.
Well, I mean, I've brought that point up before, is that atheists don't hold a dogmatic position. Well, in the same sense that religious people do. We don't have certain scripture that we follow. If what you're going to do is, when you become an atheist, to start taking a look at stuff that Hitchens or Dawkins or Sam Harris are writing out there, all you're doing is swapping out one book for another.
Well, some atheists do. One atheist, who I won't mention, it recently made a video characterizing what true atheism and real atheism is, and unless you believe this particular creed that he espouses, then you're not a real atheist, and you're not even an atheist at all. You're an atheist in theist clothing, and or you're actually a theist in atheist clothing. There are in fact atheists who are completely dogmatic. It is possible to take the man out of the fundamentalism, but sometimes taking the fundamentalism out of the man is a little bit harder.
Yeah.
And there are in fact a lot of atheists who will just evict one species of religiosity out of their lives, but they don't suddenly get a PhD in critical thinking because they shed or tumbled out of their faith, and they can be just as dogmatic, and they can be beholden to Pope Sam Harris. I'm an admirer of Sam Harris's work, but I'm not beholden to his ideas. So that even if Sam Harris came out and said, by God, if you believe in God, you're insane. That would hold no water with me, and that's how it should be. So atheism, strictly speaking, involves no creed, but lots of atheists have creeds.
Dave, can I ask you a question? If you're still around right now. All right. Well,
Hello, sorry.
okay. Religion itself might not, or religiosity might not be a mental illness. Do you feel that religion can contribute to mental illness at all? Do you feel that this is that in some sense religion still might be dangerous to the mental health of someone? Or how do you feel about statements like that?
I think there's sort of two strands to that. I think there's the religion side of it and the sort of religious side of it, and I'll try and clarify that. The religion side of it, which is what I mentioned in the side chat, is religion offers a safe house for irrational beliefs, and I'll try and justify that. Basically, I guess I go with Ozzy/Sam Harris's point of, if you, for example, if I say every morning I say some Spanish words over a Ritz cracker and some Sprite, and I think that it turns into the body and blood of Elvis, not many people would think I'm sane. You change some of the ingredients, the Sprite and the crackers to the wine and bread, and Elvis to a first century Jewish carpenter, you get a billion Catholics. So I think when you say it's my religion that, particularly in the past, before probably the rise of new atheism, people would just have to say, oh, it's your religion, I can't criticize that. So that's probably the first point of why religion as an enterprise, not just, but then I think sort of religious belief, essentially, as I think it was Cider, whoever was mentioned, it was is a source of self-identity, and I didn't realize I could go there, but I'm going to go with.
I think we lost Dave there.
Did the Scientologist get in?
But does anybody else have anything to contribute to that while we wait for Dave to get back?
I've agreed on everything so far. I can't think anything not covered.
I can speak to that point about Sam Harris, because I've heard him talk about that example where he says, if you believe that saying a few words over Sprite and crackers in Spanish puts you in touch with Elvis, that makes you crazy. But if you do it over wine and bread in Latin, that makes you a Catholic, right? What's the difference there, right? Like, why should that make a difference? Why aren't if one's insane, why isn't the other insane? Right? Why aren't millions of Catholics crazy? Well, it's because if a person does this all on their own, if we have no way of explaining how they arrived at this idea, okay? If we can't through examining how cultural transmission contributed this idea to them, it just developed out of their own mind, then there's strong reason to think that there's something wrong with their mind. Okay? But when millions of people do it, we understand how millions of people came to have this peculiar idea, right? That saying some Latin words over wine and bread results in the miracle of transubstantiation and puts you in communion with the divine, right? We understand where this idea came from. We understand how this idea is presently in the minds of people. They were taught this by people that they trust. That's not a very good, it's not a very sound epistemological practice, but it's a normal, healthy way of learning things. It's how we learn almost everything. Why do I believe in evolution? Look, I didn't do the experiments myself. I didn't dig up the fossils. I didn't reproduce the science. I trust certain sources. That's how we all work. Everyone works on trusting certain sources. What's different about science is that we can check up on the sources. We can reproduce the findings, right? That's what's different about science. But I didn't do any of that myself, and I don't need to. I trust certain sources. And what happens, though, is some people trust certain other sources, the wrong sources. There's nothing disordered in their thinking in that they trust sources. It's just unfortunate that they trust the wrong sources, which is why it's important to disabuse people of bad ideas so that they find out what are the right sources to trust and what the criteria are, the rational criteria are for trusting certain sources over other sources. But there's no mystery about why Catholics believe what they do. It's because they were taught these things by people they love and trust and have every reason to love and trust, that their family and their community. So there's no mystery. There's no reason to appeal to something, some malfunction in the individual minds of all these millions of people. That is a crazy explanation, if you'll pardon the pun. That's a crazy way of explaining what's happening with Catholics. What's going on with Catholics who believe this and practice this is explained by cultural transmission and the fact that we trust people when we shouldn't always trust them, and we don't always exercise good critical thinking because critical thinking is hard, and we're given to natural cognitive biases. It's perfectly explicable without appeal to mental illness.
What in that makes the difference of being taught it by an authority or coming up with it in your own head?
There's no
of sanity.
What makes it, it's how you acquire it. If it's the product of a malfunction in your mind, then it's a mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not the product of a malfunction in your mind, if you just happen to learn it because that's what you were taught, because that's what your parents shipped you off to Sunday school and they taught you catechism in church, right? That explains it. It's not a malfunction in your mind. That's why it's not a mental disorder. That's why it's not a mental illness, right? That's what's wrong with this theory. Is there's already an explanation that's very obviously correct that explains why people believe what they do when they believe all these preposterous things. And you can run the experiment if you want. You can just take a bunch of kids and ship them off to Jesus camp and watch what they come out believing. Oh, is it just a coincidence that all the kids that go to Jesus camp, they all just happen to be mentally ill? No. You can take anybody's kids and ship them off to Jesus camp, and almost all of them will come out thinking the same thing, believing the same preposterous things. It's indoctrination and brainwashing.
I say it all the time.
We have an explanation.
I say that all the time, that I grew up, all the authorities around me told me what to believe kind of thing. I believed it, and I'm at a point where I'm trying to find out what I actually believe.
Absolute. You wanted to add something into that as well.
Sure. Yeah, I think we can all pretty much agree that just the religion itself, the belief in a God, is not mental illness. I think we've established pretty much that far. What about, could we say with a degree of confidence that people who emphatically believe that they had personal physical contact with a deity or with Jesus could be a form, there could be a form of psychosis there, that an underlying, that like a hallucination could be a form of that. So that is something that we could say, okay, maybe this is something that needs to be looked at. Not the religion itself, not the belief itself, but the belief that you were visited by a deity.
I think you could say that. You could say maybe we should look at this, but I don't think you could just automatically classify someone as being insane from that.
Well, any belief you can get through a malfunction in your brain would be evidence of some type of mental illness. Like I can look at a sheet of paper, and I can look at it, and there's markings on the sheet of paper that tells me what someone else meant to send me in a message, because there's these markings on it are aligned in a certain way that form letters and words. But someone else can pick up a sheet of paper and think he's receiving a message from someone based on the markings on this paper when he doesn't know language and it's not actually written in a language. He's just randomly attributing these things as a message that someone is trying to teach him. We're both doing the exact same action with the same beliefs, but one is through some type of error in his cognitive function, and the other one is through something that we have learned and we know works because we've been taught this is language and this is how you write and this is how you read, whereas another person achieved it through some other means.
Well, I think that another point to that too is that let's say somebody did have a pre-existing mental illness, if they also do hold religious beliefs, the mental illness that they do have can manifest strongly in their religious beliefs as well. the schizophrenic patient in a mental ward that thinks he's living with Jesus probably isn't the schizophrenic because he was religious. But the religion is probably one of the things that's manifesting through his schizophrenia. So again, I wouldn't think it would be a cause. It would just be just another method for a previous existing mental illness to be there.
Well, there's a complicating factor here, and that is that if you are mentally ill, if you are in fact suffering some kind of mental malfunction, right, whether it's happening at a psychological level or whether the ultimate cause of that is neural events in your brain, we don't need to beggar the question of what is the ultimate ontology of mental illness. But if there's some kind of malfunction with your mind, right, whatever the underlying causes are, we wouldn't expect that people who suffer mental illnesses are all going to be perfectly evenly distributed in every belief system, right? There might be some belief systems that towards which mentally ill people gravitate. So it's possible, quite possible, that mentally ill people are overrepresented among the religious, right, compared to the non-religious. Or it could even, I actually don't know any statistics on this. It could be that the mentally ill are overrepresented among atheists, although I think for certain demographic reasons having to do with socioeconomic factors, I think that's unlikely. So I think that the mentally ill might be somewhat overrepresented among the religious, and perhaps fairly significantly. But you can't suggest that this is the cause of religiosity just because people with mental illness might tend to gravitate and self-select for certain belief systems, right? I'm sure if you divided up everybody into their political affiliations, you would find that some political affiliations, some political groups, the Greens or the Conservatives or the Liberals or the Libertarians or whatever, however you want to carve up the pie, that there would be some political group out there where mentally ill people are overrepresented in that group, right? But you wouldn't want to say that, oh well, therefore, libertarians like Aaron Voluntarist here, they're all mentally ill. If it so happened that mentally ill people were overrepresented in that particular group, right? That would just be a gross statistical fallacy there.
Yeah.
No offense, Aaron. I wasn't. I was just trying to think of someone who has a somewhat unusual for this panel political orientation. Nothing.
It's actually true that we're libertarians. I think are over, like the INTJ personalities. We're mostly like white male, college-educated introverts. I don't know if that means anything, but just
maybe.
The libertarians are mentally ill. Gotcha.
Yep.
Is that what we established? Great.
Well, I think libertarians, and Aaron knows my views on this, I think libertarians are kind of out of touch. I think that they're not observing the facts, and I think that they're guilty of all kinds of bizarre inferential leaps. And so I think Aaron must just be crazy.
Well, before we move this on to the topic, we're going to kind of carry on with this for a few more minutes. Then we will open up the room, put the link public if anybody else wants to jump in, or if you want to add some questions in the comment section, go for it. Now that we have Dave back, if you can kind of remember where you were before, feel free to pick it up there, and we'll see where that takes us.
I'll do it mid-syllable where I was up to. Basically, I was getting onto kind of self-affirmation, social identity theory, that sort of fun thing. Essentially, I guess linking to what Ozzy was, the point he, I think, got to was representation of mental illness in specific demographics. And I think that's the broader question, and that's kind of what I'm doing my research into now, is the role of personal values, okay? Because I think that's, when we talk about why does anyone believe anything, and it's a topic that I've spoken at length about now, it's the reason why we believe anything is foundationally there's what I call a primary filter. So whenever we hear anything, we have basically these primary values that we have as an individual. So basically what I'm using is what's known as the Schwartz portrait value quotient or questionnaire, I think it is. And basically it's are you high on openness to change or conservation? So that's sort of two antagonistic opinions. So are you happy to change your opinion, or are you more content to hold to not conservative, but consistent views. The other one is self-transcendence versus self-enhancement, which is basically kind of selfish versus selfless, but in a vast, oversimplified way. And basically that's, well, one of the sort of, it's almost like a personality trait that, for example, my grandmother would be incredibly high on conservation because she says anytime I go and see her, it's like, oh, Dave, you'll never hear what they said this week. The scientists have said this week. They're saying margarine's too dangerous. There's too much saturated fat in it. So, you know, last week they were saying we're not getting enough of it. This week we're getting too much. When's it going to end? So she's very high on, well, you know, science is so up in the air. How can we keep track of this? I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing now. So she'd be high on conservation, whereas other people, I'm not going to say whether it's me or not, but other people would be like, oh, we now know more about how, you know, saturated fat works in the body or why margarine is dangerous. We should accommodate to this new finding. And this kind of links into the sort of the social identity and self-affirmation, which is basically what the self I'm referring to is that we want to view ourselves as a good person. But what it means to be a good person varies from culture to culture. And I don't mean culture as in Western and Eastern or anything like that. I mean, for example, we have a culture on YouTube, or we have several cultures on YouTube. We have the, you know, fundamentalist Christian culture. We have conspiracy theorist culture. We have atheist community, if you want to call it that. So a good person in the atheist community is probably going to be a skeptic of some sort, a secular skeptic who's, you know, open to, you know, whatever it might be. Whereas fundamentalist Christian culture would be high on, I believe the Bible is the word of God, and that sort of, you know, mantra. And same with conspiracy theorists. If you watch any of it or read any of the comments on the Vigilant Christians YouTube, you know, any of the comments there, diabolically bad. But you know, they have their own culture, and a good person in that culture is someone who holds a similar set of, you know, norms and values and so on. So essentially, we want to be perceived as, and we want to feel like a good person, and that depends on what your demographic is. So the reason why I think the internet has been so influential in, you know, where religion comes to die almost, is because we no longer have these isolated cultures. In that, it's the paradox of anyone's able to talk to anyone, but you can still have subcultures in that you can find a forum in which you can find someone who thinks that, you know, the government's out to get them, and the, you know, conspiracy theory side. So you can, your social identity becomes, you know, you wear your heart on your sleeve. And I think someone alluded to it if they didn't say it. Giving up a belief is almost like giving up a part of yourself, and that's incredibly hard to do. And I don't think a lot of people want to do that. And so beyond the sort of pragmatic, you know, I need to pay the bills and put food on my plate, so I need to get a job. So the reason why people like William Lane Craig can't almost give up, you know, Christianity, or at least things like that, is because ultimately, what good could come out of it? Now we could argue he would be embraced by the atheist community of, oh, look, this is, you know, the transition you can go through. But I think the bottom line is we want to be perceived as a good person. We want to feel like a good person, and anything that challenges that, and that includes people encountering a belief or encountering people who don't share your belief, it makes us feel like a bad person. So we need to resolve that dissonance somehow, and there are ways of doing that. Some are better than others, but I've talked for long enough now, so if someone else can jump in.
Well, you see that even just in humans in general, of getting rid of things. Like you'd see a deaf person, if at 20 years old they find that they can actually have an operation where they can hear, they won't go through with the operation, or they'll reject it because that's their identity. They don't want to lose. I mean, you see things like that all the time.
Well, one of the things that I brought up at the beginning of the show, and we'll kind of address now as well, is the idea that this is not a new concept. This is not a new argument that's come out here. That even in the short time that I've been on YouTube, I've seen cycles where this argument has come out before, and people have tried to push this whole religion as a mental illness thing. And why do you think people are drawn to making arguments like this? Why are people drawn to making these overly simplified, fallacious arguments in general?
I think it has something to do with what Floyd said in the beginning about, if you don't agree with me, you're insane. You know, it's basically just an ad hominem attack. You know, it's I'm going to discredit everything that you have to say because you don't agree with me.
Yeah, when you have like an ideological two polarized views that are sort of at odds with each other, you'll find that the people within them become partisan, not in a political way, but like they become partisan for their side, and so it becomes very easy to accept. Not only will you accept arguments from your side and be more willing to hear them out, but you'll also be more willing to accept bad arguments from your side and be less critical of your side and be more critical of their side, even to the point of dismissing what they have to say as, oh, that's insane, that's ridiculous. Like, how many times have you heard a fundamentalist hear one of the most clear-cut sound points on, say, something evolution, something like that, and it's like, so for example, carbon dating is a very good example. I mean, it depends on chemistry. It's not something that you're just testing in a lab saying, okay, I kind of think this fits with a theory. No, carbon dating is something that depends on a very well-established scientific fact. If you're disagreeing with chemistry, you literally just about have to be anti-science. But they'll not hear these arguments out, and when they dismiss them, and they'll say things like, oh, this is crazy, look how ridiculous your numbers are, and not looking into the reasons why certain things gave a certain result. And so it's sort of like you start hedging yourself to one position instead of the other.
Well, I think it's not very hard to explain why this particular allegation gets recycled, right? That the religious are mentally ill. I think it's the same reason that atheists get accused of being mentally ill by fundamentalists sometimes. Right? This is something that you hear. I mean, just look on YouTube. You'll find plenty of videos by fundamentalist Christians trying to declare, as Floyd said at the outset, that atheists and other non-believers are mentally ill. They're just denying the obvious evidence of their senses. As they see it, the evidence for God's existence is manifest. Okay, it's obvious. It's obvious in the fact that there's design and pattern and order and regularity and uniformity in nature. It's evident in the fact that you have a conscience and some intuitive sense of right and wrong, and all kinds of things like that. They'll point to all kinds of facts that, as they see it, imply that there's a God. Now, those of us on the other side of the fence are going to say, well, no, those are bad inferences. Okay. But the point is, you've got two sides that disagree on the facts, and while one side might be right and the other side wrong, the point is the motivation seems to be very, very clearly the same. You don't seem to be arriving at the conclusion that seems perfectly obvious to me. There must be something wrong with your reasoning faculties, that your mind must be malfunctioning. It can't be that, oh, no, well, maybe you were taught some stuff, right? It can't be that maybe you're given to certain cognitive biases. It can't be that there's a lot of motivated reasoning here because your worldview delivers all kinds of emotional and intellectual and psychological rewards to you. No, it can't be any of that. It couldn't be that you've taken on board some bad epistemological principles. Like a conspiracy theory will take on a principle like contrary evidence is actually evidence of the conspiracy, because any contrary evidence that's put forward is actually something that's been leaked out by the conspirators to throw people off the trail and hide the conspiracy and stuff like that, right? And thus, disconfirming evidence gets turned into evidence for the conspiracy, right? I mean, once you take that principle on board, once you take on board the idea that the absence of evidence is actually evidence of the efficacy of the conspiracy, and once you take on board the idea that contrary evidence was planted by the conspirators to throw people off the trail, okay, once you've taken that on board, once that's in your belief set, now you've got antibodies against contrary objections and arguments, right? That's a bad epistemological principle, right? You're burning your epistemological bridges. Once you believe something like that, you're insulated. Once you believe something like, when atheists are trying to talk you out of your beliefs, that's the devil talking, you shouldn't listen to them. Once that belief's in your head, boom, suddenly you don't have to take anything that atheists say, and you've insulated your belief set, right? So we all do this to some degree. We all sort of suffer from this tendency. But these are facts that make it clear why people are going to be irrational. We're inclined to believe what people in our trusted communities tell us, especially from childhood on. We're inclined to believe things that are emotionally and psychologically and intellectually satisfying. We're not good reasoners. We're not born good critical thinkers who don't believe things until we have evidence. That's not how children work. We work on the opposite principle. We are born naive credulists who just drink in with our mother's milk what values and beliefs are being expounded around us. We just take it on faith. That's how we start. And only as we develop critical faculties do we start to question these things. And if along the way you start acquiring these meta beliefs that tell you don't trust these sources, trust those sources, you're allowed to think about this, don't think about that, that's wrong. If you think that way, it's a bad way of thinking. Once you get those beliefs in there, now you're pretty well locked in. You're pretty well walled into your belief set. That, along with cognitive biases and the difficulty, the unnaturalness of critical thinking, how hard it is to acquire and actually get good at it, all of that seems to me more than explains why there are people out there who believe preposterous things and perversely cling to them in the face, in the very teeth of contrary evidence. You don't have to posit anything wrong with anybody's mind at all. When something goes wrong with somebody's mind, it's a terrible thing, but there's absolutely no explanatory work being done here, because positing a mental illness or mental disorder to explain this massive, spreading, contagious belief in manifest falsehoods, it's all easily explained. Mental illness is just surplus to requirements. It's just not necessary to explain this. It's already easily explained.
You know, the Bible.
It's just hard to get rid of it.
The Bible told me you would say that, Ozzy.
So, Dave has to drop out here soon. Dave, before you take off, do you have any final words or anything you just want to plug, say, or anything before you take off?
I just want to say thank you very much for a really interesting and respectful conversation. And yeah, no, thank you for the invite. And I'd like to think this topic doesn't come up again, but we say the same thing about like Pascal's wager, and how many times have we had to deal with that? So I'm not holding my breath. But thank you very much, and I'll leave you to it, guys.
Everybody,
thank you very much, Dave.
Dave S's channel. What is your channel? Just under Dave S?
Yeah, if it might actually still be under the Global Atheism if you go on my YouTube page, but yeah, Dave S is maybe where you'll find it. I don't know how many Dave S's there are, but yes, thanks for the plug.
All right, thank you very much for coming. Absolute Atheism, you wanted to ask a question, and then Cider, you wanted to ask him some after that, and then we'll open up to Josh here if you wanted to add anything as well.
Sure. I was thinking about how a child grows up being instructed on Santa Claus. Okay, I know it's kind of funny. I'm just going to throw that in there, but eventually that child realizes that Santa Claus is not real, and he can make that choice and decide that that's not real, and he goes on with his life. But a child grows up believing in God. For some reason, he's unable to realize that that's not true. And I was wondering, anybody have any thoughts on that? Like, why is it that they can choose that Santa Claus isn't real, but they cannot choose that God isn't real?
Well, there's evidence Santa Claus isn't real.
Well,
But saying that Santa Claus isn't real. Parents will confirm that eventually. It's pretty easy to fall out of.
Yeah.
Right. I think more society kind of tells these children don't come to that usually on their own. They're not isolated and come to that idea.
Yeah. The idea of Santa Claus being real is not actively encouraged by authority figures, at least not for very long.
Yeah, it could also be that because Christians pretty much insulate themselves from opposing opinions. I mean, the church that I grew up, I grew up Pentecostal, and we were not to watch movies, listen to music, hang out with anybody that was not in the church. I was completely insulated from the outside world. So yeah, I mean, I had no reason. Now, I wouldn't consider myself mentally ill. I just had no reason not to doubt it, until, of course, the questions began, mounting, and there was no answers to those questions. But that's another story. But yeah, I think that a lot of these Christians insulate themselves so much that the idea that it's not true never even enters their mind.
I don't even think they have to be insulated. I mean, I wasn't insulated. I grew up with a fundamentalist upbringing, and I sort of tumbled out of my faith in my late adolescence. But I mean, I wasn't insulated. I was exposed to other people of different faiths, primarily Catholics actually, and a few other faiths. You know, my best friend was Jewish, for instance. I don't know that I actually knew any atheists, to be honest, when I was growing up. But in any case, you don't have to be insulated. Just think, though, how effective it is that religious people have a tendency to get together in something called church or temple or mosque. Okay, what goes on in a church service, right? Think of what a church service is. This is a place where people of like mind, who are committed to the same set of doctrines and dogmas, get together on a weekly basis with people that they trust because they're part of their community, and they hear their doctrines rehearsed and preached at them. This is a place where they go in the company of like-minded people, where no one's going to stand up and ask an impertinent question and challenge the dogmas, right? And they go and they expose themselves to an hour or more of belief maintenance, belief preservation, belief rehearsal. Okay, that's what goes on in church. That's the function that it serves in a person's cognitive economy. I mean, church is not just for that, but epistemologically, that's what church is. It's a place where you go to rehearse your belief in the company of like-minded individuals who are there to have their beliefs shorn up, preserved, and maintained, and not challenged. And where if anyone did challenge it, ooh man, that'd be pretty chilly if you tried to do that, right? So it's no surprise that even if the people are not insular, that they still resist their beliefs. Their beliefs are getting very much ratified on a weekly basis, right? And those of us in the secular atheistic community, I think we have to be careful of that too. You know, we get together in these hangouts and do this. We got to be careful that we sort of police ourselves and police one another and challenge one another in what we say and what we believe, so that we don't end up repeating the same, effectively what amount to creeds and doctrines.
That point literally just came up in the side chat.
Oh, did it? Yeah. We have to be very careful about that.
Yeah.
Satter, you had one last point that you wanted to make?
Yeah, just more broadly on the point of why these topics and arguments keep coming up. You have to bear in mind that there's always going to be, with the advent of YouTube and various and by nature of people falling out of faith, there are always going to be newcomers to this argument. So they are going to want to have their 2 cents. So we can say that we have dealt with this argument because we have, but you have to bear in mind that for a lot of people encountering this whole set of questions, it is new for them. So that's all I would add to that.
Josh, have you been? Is Josh there? I think he might be away from his computer. Wolf, have you been following along with the conversation?
Yeah, to a degree.
All right. Do you have anything that you wanted to add on to the topic, or any of the topics we kind of covered?
Let's see. What was the specific point? Because I was drifting in and out, honestly.
It was the argument of religion as a mental illness, and is it an effective argument? Why does it keep on coming up? Is there any truth in it?
Well, I mean, it's sort of I mean, like the idea of it, being a mental illness. I mean, people have been looking for psychological, if not evolutionary, reasons for why religion exists. So I wouldn't say it's a mental illness. You can make a case that there are some people who are like religious who could suffer from mental illness, but that's more or less subjective. To say religion is a mental illness is a bullshit argument. I'll be right back.
All right. Josh, are you still around? I'd like to hear your input on this.
Away from his desk. Even if he's talking, you've got him on mute, so...
Yeah, I had some echo coming in from there earlier. going on the point that I know we kind of covered it, and Oz kind of went over it with the Santa Claus, but yeah, I mean, the main difference, is that once you grow up, it's no longer this behavior it's no longer reinforced, essentially, and that's I think one of the things that you have to do. That the main difference between a belief like tooth fairies or Santa and a belief like religion is the fact that once you leave that environment where it's a lot harder to maintain that belief among social pressure, you're probably not going to have that type of that belief anymore. But the way that society is kind of set up right now is that there is really no social pressure for people not to have that belief. But Josh, have you been following around with this? Following around with the conversation?
A little.
Okay. Did you want to add anything to the topic at all?
Yeah. When anthropologists and sociologists they started looking at belief in God in the old religions, that they tried to do away with the gods per se and say religion was primarily about sacred rites and they really didn't believe any of this stuff, and I would say the continuation of religion by sophisticated people, and it's really the downfall of this secularization thesis. So I don't see why we could say it's because of peer pressure, but maybe it's more to do with a rational decision.
So you're saying that more that secularism is the irrational view.
No.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood that then.
I don't think it's irrational. I mean, I think a person can be, very rational and be an atheist.
I'm curious, Josh. I presume you mean that atheists aren't systematically irrational, and I don't think that. Although I think something like religious fundamentalism is irrational, I don't think that fundamentalists are systematically irrational. I think they're irrational with respect to certain beliefs that they've compartmentalized. When you say that you don't think that atheists are irrational, do you think that they're irrational insofar as they are atheists with respect to their atheism?
No.
No, okay.
Because I think that a person will do anything to use any kind of arguments to cloud or separate himself from the presence of God that he sees in nature and through his conscience. I think we have a predisposition towards that.
Wouldn't you think that's irrational, though, to do that?
Well, maybe we're justified in thinking. It comes down to maybe an argument like the absence of evidence is evidence of absence. So generally, when we don't see something or immediately hits our sense perceptions, we are justified in saying, well, there's no good reason to think that thing doesn't exist. But why should we think that about an immaterial being? So maybe it's just because we have a proclivity to postulate some ontology to things we see and not about things we don't see. But I think we're rational in postulating things we don't see all the time. And indeed, with the advance of modern science, there's many things that are postulated that are you can't see and aren't readily testable, but they have to be weighed according to various other criteria, such as simplicity and so forth.
Well, what if you go to like the white swan thing, where all the ever seen are white swans, only white swans exist, kind of thing? Would I be irrational by saying that? Or would I be rational positing that there could be black or blue or a green swan? Things I've never seen before.
Yeah, well, that's when what good reason you have for it. For example, in the case of miracles, I mean, should we say therefore that since we've never seen a miracle with our own eyes, therefore, all throughout history, miracles have never happened. But if we knew of a guy that was alive and then we had reliable witnesses that report that he was dead and then alive again, we would base the evidence on the trustworthiness of the witnesses involved.
Right.
And
I don't think I'd follow it to saying that it happened, but I wouldn't take the strong stance saying that it didn't happen or couldn't happen.
Yeah. Well, you'd be an agnostic then, right?
Yeah, that's probably a good label for tonight.
I'd be a little cautious with the analogy about science and things, the hypothetical entities that science posits. When scientists posit a hypothetical entity, like a new particle, like the Higgs boson before we discovered it, and stuff like that, or a planet, like right now they're positing there could be some kind of planet or planetoid beyond the orbit of Pluto that would explain certain eccentricities in the orbital trajectory of Pluto. When they posit a hypothetical entity like that, whether it's something similar to what we know exists or something really far out, right? When they posit something like dark matter or dark energy, right? They're doing it on the basis of a principle called abduction, inference to the best explanation, right? And you don't conclude, therefore, that the entity exists. It's a posit. It's a hypothetical entity that you're positing.
Yeah.
And the idea is, if this entity exists and has the properties that we specify, that if that existed, then that would explain X, Y, and Z that need to be explained.
Yeah.
That doesn't conclusively establish that the thing exists, but it constitutes a reason to think that it might exist,
Yeah.
and hopefully we'll find independent evidence for it. And if we don't, well, then we'll still have some weak evidence for thinking that it could be there.
Hold on. That abduction, I agree with you but I think that's evidence. If it explains various types of phenomena, I think
I agree.
Yeah. So
that's abduction. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No. I wasn't suggesting that you're only warranted in thinking that it exists if you also have independent evidence of it. No. The fact that it explains, that it works as an explanatory entity, is at least putative evidence for its existence. It's not conclusive, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's if you have enough of it, right? The more of that evidence that you get, that indirect evidence that you get, the better that becomes as an inference to the best explanation, especially if competing theories don't explain as well.
Yeah, and all throughout New Testament scholarship, all these naturalistic theories or hypotheses about the resurrection of Jesus have liberal scholars have even criticized them and sent them their death. They're in the coffin. Their death now in the coffin, so to speak. So I totally agree with you. I don't think theism is any theist could give 100% argument. It's just to the best explanation, the most comprehensive. So it's not just testability we're thinking of. Testability is a criteria, okay, but there's also simplicity and comprehensiveness, and that's why I think theism explains more the phenomena than atheism.
Well, I mean, it asserts an explanation, but is it really an explanation?
Yeah, I would say that things like simplicity and scope are actually not good epistemic virtues. When we talk about explanatory virtues, okay, when philosophers of science are talking about what constitutes a good explanation, they divide the sorts of virtues that make up a good explanation into different categories. There are those that are epistemic, those are the virtues that imply the truth, strictly the truth of the object that you're positing. Okay, so for instance, predictive success. Okay, that's an epistemic virtue. Okay, saving the phenomena, adequately describing the phenomena. That's an epistemic virtue. Okay, but then there are other virtues like there are pragmatic virtues like how promising a theory is. Okay, you have one theory that's been around for a long time, but it's starting to totter. It's full of anomalies, and people keep patching it up, and it doesn't look very promising anymore. But then you have a new theory. It doesn't explain as well as the old theory, but it looks like it holds more promise. It's not shot through with problems that you have to keep patching up, right? So that's a pragmatic virtue. But that actually doesn't. The fact that a theory is more promising doesn't mean that it is in fact more likely to be true. It's just more promising, and we might choose it for that reason. That's a non-epistemic value. And then there are aesthetic things. The idea that a theory is just more elegant, right? Explains more with fewer posits. The principle of parsimony. Okay. Well, that's an aesthetic virtue, but that's not an epistemic virtue. So I myself wouldn't favor a theory that was explained more phenomena using fewer posits than another theory, unless they both explain the phenomena equally well. I mean, everything else being equal, I'll go with the more elegant theory, because then I think it makes sense to go with a more elegant theory under those circumstances. But otherwise, no. So I don't think that you can just look at scope, because remember, the scope, the breadth, how many phenomena get included under a theory really depends on a lot of things. And if your theory is very vague, for instance, right? If your theory is God did it, well, that's maximally explanatory. That explains everything, right? If you say God has universe creating properties, and he can create any old universe, and therefore anything that you can point to, he could have created. If you posit a being that has such an ability, then great, yeah, great. You can subsume all phenomena that exist and all phenomena that could exist under that explanation. But that's not a good explanation. That's actually a very weak explanation. But it sure is broad in its scope, in its covering power, right? So covering power is great. Scope is a really good and important variable. It's an important virtue, but it's not a very good epistemic virtue.
So I'm going to, sorry to cut you off right there, Josh. We are getting into the end of the show here, so I'm going to go down the list, get everybody chances to say last comments or a little plug or whatever regarding the topic that we're talking about here tonight. I'll start with you, Aaron. We'll do this alphabetically from A's this time.
Use my first name. Okay. Yeah, basically, I think the best point that I can make, because I'm not all that well versed in psychology, but the thing is, it's not a good argument. It simply is just an ad hominem. It simply is just a genetic fallacy to slap a label on something in order to demean a position. I don't think if psychologists come around, so to speak, and say that one, atheism or theism, one or the other, is a mental disorder, if they would ever do that, if they had ever done it in the past, it shouldn't actually change your position. It shouldn't, even if you have a body of people saying you're mentally ill for believing this, it still doesn't undermine anything. If you have justifications, then go with it. And if you don't have justifications, just because it's not a mental illness, that's not a point in your favor either. It doesn't mean anything. It's just whether or not we choose to slap a label on something. It's like calling someone a heretic. It's exactly the same. If you got all these theists calling other people a heretic for having certain belief theologically, does that refute you? No, it doesn't address your claim. Call them a heretic, fine. Put that category on it. If there is a certain category of belief called heresy, that's fine. But you also have to go the extra step and show exactly what is incorrect about the belief being espoused by these so-called heretics. So.
All right, thanks. Absolute.
Sure. Unless you are a professional mental health worker, shouldn't be calling somebody else mentally ill. It is just a ad hominem, and it kind of does a disservice to actual people who actually have mental illness. I think we can be better than that in our dealings with in the debate community. I think we don't need to resort to name calling and generalizations like that. I think we can do a better job. So that's where I come out.
All right, Cider.
Well, frankly, Absolute basically said it better than I could have done. So other than just to briefly say, as someone who's made his position on this relatively public and got a bit of feedback from it, I just want to say how nice it is to actually have a conversation about this where I'm not head desking.
That's always good. Floyd.
Yeah, I have nothing really extra to add. Again, yeah, I think it's best to leave medical diagnosis up to the medical experts, and we shouldn't play doctor.
All right, Josh. Anything that you want to add in before we take off as well?
No, I just think we should. There's a lot that binds us together. We should all, with humility, just always treat each other with respect and not name call.
All right, Ozzy.
Yeah, I got some things. As I say, people by and large, they come to believe in religions because they trust the people in their families and communities who are the ones who impart these beliefs to them. And that's not a cognitive or psychological malfunction or the product of a neuropathology. That's how a properly functioning brain does and should work. Okay, that's not the best and most reliable and most trustworthy way of arriving at your beliefs, but that is in fact a normal inferential practice and belief acquisition practice. And because it's so unreliable, that's why it's vital that we strive to disabuse people of their unwarranted, false, and harmful ideas, and it's why we should promote scientific values and critical thinking and logic. But as I see it, there is no need, because it's false to fact to suggest that people are religious because they're suffering from a mental disorder. The acquisition of false beliefs, I think, is better explained and understood by mundane mechanisms of cultural transmission, natural cognitive biases, and the fact that it's difficult to acquire and become good at critical thinking. And you can do all of that without, you can explain everything that needs to be explained here without invoking the concept of mental illness at all. And I think that the claim that religion or religiosity is a mental disorder, or it's a symptom of a mental disorder or leads to mental disorder, is not just inaccurate. I think it's a violation of the principle of intellectual charity. I think, but most worrisome for me as an atheist is it misidentifies the very reason why a faith-based outlook is potentially so dangerous. One of the most worrisome facts about irrational beliefs that are transmitted this way is that once they're acquired, they can move large groups of people, of perfectly sane people, to behave in ways which they would otherwise have to be insane to do. Okay, you don't have to be crazy to believe crazy things or do crazy things. You just have to have on board enough bad ideas, false beliefs, and unreliable epistemological principles. Okay, you don't have to posit a mental disorder. And lastly, I'd say that it might be very viscerally satisfying if you're a critic of a faith-based outlook to go around calling people mentally ill, but that, I think, impedes our effort to loosen the grip of religiosity in our culture, and I think it plays right into the hands of apologists who can point to people saying things like that and say, hey, see, look at that. Because when you're doing that, when you say these things, you are in fact living up to the very worst stereotype of the angry, bitter, God-hating, emotionally driven, rebellious, anti-religious bigot who is too lazy to actually argue against the claims of religion and argue that they're unwarranted, and instead try to dismiss them. Right? I think we play right into the hands of our opponents when we do this. Why would we do it when it's a fallacious argument? Why would we do it when there's already a better explanation on the table and no good evidence to support it? It just seems to me completely strategically, just on the grounds of strategy alone, from the standpoint of trying to re-engineer our society away from that kind of faith-based outlook, it just seems to me doomed to failure.
All right, thank you. Shanna.
I insist from now on Oz goes last.
I second this motion.
Yeah.
I'll keep that in mind next week.
Yeah. Because I'm essentially just going to echo some things that were already said, but oh well. I think that Floyd really hit it. Stop playing doctor. You're not qualified to throw out diagnoses at people. Stop that. And then something that Aaron said earlier that I thought was just brilliant. Then what? What follows from that? Even if they are mentally ill, how does that address the arguments? How does that address the religion? Does it mean there's no God? Does that mean that Christianity or Islam, does it mean that any of these religions are false or that the claims are false? No. Nothing follows from that meaningful. And it just makes you look lazy and like a fool. There.
Like a fool.
All right. Wolf, anything to add? All right. Xbox, anything to add?
Yeah, just for the sake of being, I mean, as humans, we need to work hard to strive to be rational and objective. So, I mean, let's address the points rather than just call people crazy, because to do that is nothing more than a ridiculous ad hominem that doesn't answer the point of the discussion.
Hey, plug your show still, if you're still doing it.
Yeah, watch Wolf Dance Radio every Friday, 5 o'clock.
All right.
I'm actually revitalizing that. So Xbox, whenever you're whenever you're actually ready to do that alongside again, let me know.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll talk about it after for sure.
All right. Xbox.
Yeah, me go after all that. I agree. I agree. I'm glad the ad hominem and stuff were actually pointed out. I hadn't actually thought about that side of them. I do agree with Floyd and all that it should be the doctors. Like I said, it's not just a checkbox thing that, okay, they meet all these, they're mentally ill. It's deeper than that, and I don't think the religious fit that bill. So that's about it.
Yeah. I think the one point I might want to kind of expand on is that when it comes to any of these arguments, any of these overly simplified, fallacious arguments that atheists or theists try to use, is you become the straw man, when that people try to represent the other side with. Of the like Ozzy was saying, of the angry, bitter atheist that doesn't really disbelieve, but just hates God and hates all religious people, or rejecting it that way. When you use these arguments, that's how it comes across as. It's just you are the straw man that they built, and I don't think it benefits anyone to actually use those arguments ever. But that being said, I want to thank Aaron, Absolute, Cider, Floyd, Josh, Ozzy, Shanna, Wolf, and X, as well as Dave S. that was in here earlier, for coming out. It's been a great show, and catch us next week. Thank you very much.